Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with an annoying rant. So, recently in the US, there was a state Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, specifically for a swing seat on the court. Now, it's technically nonpartisan, but everybody knows that Janet Protasiewicz, I think that's how you pronounce her name, was the Democrat candidate, and Daniel Kelly was the Republican candidate. That was not controversial. No one was surprised by this. Now, Dan Kelly, as we can see here, lost quite substantially, nearly 11 points. Or slightly over 11 points, technically. Why? Well, there's lots of reasons to that why. But what aren't reasons for this is what I am seeing all across election Twitter, for that matter, from a lot of Republican aligned people talking about why they keep losing elections like this. Because keep in mind, just let's say 6 months ago, they won an election in Wisconsin. They won the Senate race right here. They did also lose the gubernatorial race in Wisconsin. But that's not what you're seeing. You're not seeing actual coherent, cogent discussion about what's going on. You are seeing people basically whine because they don't know what's going on and they don't know why they're losing. I've been seeing people throw out all sorts of dumb explanations for why they're losing. And just as a short list of things, and this is not necessarily just Wisconsin, but the Republican Party as a whole, because they have had a string of bad elections, which I'll get into momentarily. But let's go over the list of things I'm seeing people talk about Republican-aligned individuals. We have, it's abortion. The Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade, and it's right on the front of voters' minds, and voters are voting against our pro-life position, and that's making us lose elections. That's one. It's Trump. Voters hate Trump, so the fact that Trump is there, it's hurting us. Or equally, you have Trump wasn't participating in the race, so our turnout didn't happen, so we lost. Then it's the MAGA movement. The MAGA movement's unpopular. No one likes MAGA. MAGA doesn't turn out voters. It's the neocons. Basically the same argument, but backwards. It's fraud. The Democrats are cheating. We couldn't possibly lose. The Democrats cheated. It's turnout. Our voters just aren't voting. I wonder why. And then there's some fun, nuanced versions of the fraud argument. This is not technically fraud, but claiming things like ballot harvesting are why we're losing. That was really common in Pennsylvania for 2022. A lot of people said, oh, we lost Pennsylvania because they were better at ballot harvesting than us. And I don't necessarily disagree with that assessment, but that assessment misses the point, which I'll get into. What we need to understand here about the GOP and about elections is the GOP, especially recently, is hilariously bad at elections. Obviously, you have this one here, but let's look at presidential ones. Look at all the presidential ones that could have mattered in the last, let's say, 23 years. So, obviously, 2004 doesn't matter. You have an incumbent just after a tragic event, easy win. 2008 doesn't matter. There's a massive economic crash while the incumbent is leaving office, so it's an open race. Easy win for Obama. That's not contested. So then we have 4 races that actually are worth considering. Let's look at the first one. Let's look at 2000. What happens in 2000? Bush barely wins. In fact, some Democrats will still even say to this day that he won by fraud, which was the same dumb argument the Republicans make. But the Democrats seem to have smartened up about that and learned better. But notably here, Bush had fewer voters and won by the skin of his teeth, specifically with a surprise flip of West Virginia. A lot of focus was on Florida, but no one expected West Virginia to flip, is my understanding. But this is a very, 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 very close race. This tells you, because keep in mind, you have an open race after 8 years of Democrat incumbent. This should be a GOP advantage race just by itself. The fact that it is a close race and Bush nearly loses. I think we're like 10,000 votes in Florida was the difference or something like that. Or was it less? Maybe it was 1,000. Anyways, there was a very, very small number of votes in Florida. The fact that that was the difference shows you that Bush ran a bad campaign. He should have won. He had the advantage going into this naturally. Then we look at 2012. We have bad economic times and what appeared to be a weak incumbent. Obama wasn't polling well, and then you see this election and it's absolutely dumpstered. It's not close. There's a 4% lead in popular vote and 226 electoral votes. Sorry, 126? It's not a close race. And a lot of the states that Romney needs to win, like Florida, the Rust Belt, Sun Belt states that the GOP could conceivably flip, they're not particularly close either. So it's not that he won by the skin of his teeth, Obama. He won convincingly. It's not a close race. Then we'll skip 2016. Well, I'll go to 2016. 2016 is a very similar beast with 2 caveats. So Trump is a less popular candidate than Hillary. That is objectively so. We have the data here. More people voted for Hillary. The difference here, and in fact, this is a marginally good campaign on the Republican side, though I would not call it a good campaign. But it was a competent campaign on the Republican side, which I'll touch in a bit on what that actually means. But Trump ran a competent campaign and Hillary really didn't. Hillary should have won regardless of Trump's campaign. Trump could have had an even better campaign, and it's likely he still should have lost. Hillary ended up losing the election because she didn't care about the Rust Belt. She took it for granted because it is a solid blue area prior to 2016. The thing you need to understand about elections is there's a difference between losing and the other person winning. I'll give you an example of a game. Let's say you're playing soccer. There's a difference between your team losing the game and their team winning the game. The dumbest, most blatantly simple example of this is if you score an own goal and they don't score any goals, and you don't score any goals on them, your team has lost. But your team hasn't lost because they beat you. Your team lost because they scored on themselves. And it's also worth noting with this that you can run a terrible campaign. You can be garbage at playing soccer. But if the other team scores a goal on themselves and can't score on you, a garbage campaign can still win. Equally, you can run an amazing campaign and it doesn't matter because the other team scores a goal on themselves. That's almost what 2016 is. Trump didn't win, Hillary lost. There's a difference. Now we go to 2020 and we have the opposite. Biden did not win 2020. Trump lost 2020. Whereas in 2016, Trump ran a competent campaign. I don't really want to say good because he didn't get more votes, but he ran a competent campaign. He ran a terrible campaign in 2016. Like, truly a bad campaign. So bad, in fact, it's almost hard to believe he even tried to win. Whereas Biden just coasted. He ran a generic campaign, neither good nor bad. It just is a campaign. But there's more examples too. It's not just presidentials, not just Wisconsin's Supreme Court. We're looking at a lot of things here. So let's look at 2022 House elections. This was supposed to be a big red wave. Many people, myself included, erroneously overestimated the Republicans here. Why? Well, it's not because the polls were wrong. In fact, actually, the polls were really accurate, which is why my model was wrong. But why didn't it materialize into something more relevant? Again, things like ballot harvesting and abortion and Trump were all laid down as things why 2022 went subpar. That's ridiculous. 2022 went subpar because the national GOP ran a terrible campaign and was only salvaged because Lee Zeldin, and to a lesser extent DeSantis, ran good campaigns and flipped a lot of seats. And then, naturally, we have the 2022 Senate elections, which were pretty abysmal for the GOP, to say the least. But of the five, you could even say with New Hampshire, main swing Senate races, they lost 5. They lost 5 out of 5 main swing Senate races. New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and Arizona were not particularly close. Georgia wasn't particularly close once you consider the fact that a runoff was guaranteed either result. But Nevada was close. So they were that. They were close in Nevada. 1 out of 5 they were close, but still lost. And you go back even to 2020 Senate elections, and what do you have? A loss in Arizona, double loss in Georgia? Those should have been races the GOP could have won. Not guaranteed, by all means. But they should have been able to win those. At minimum, the Georgia races. The fact they failed to do that tells you they didn't run a good campaign. This is a consistent problem with the Republicans. They don't know how to win at all. I've covered a bunch of ones here that they failed epically at. And of the last, let's say 30 years, there's really been, I'm going to say 3 races that were remotely competent. 2 I would say were actually quite good races, but only 1 was remote, or 3 were remotely competent. Trump 2016, Youngkin 2021, and Lee Zeldin in 2022. Those are the only 3 races in pretty much the last 30 years that are remotely competent from the Republicans. Most of the other ones were a case of either winning by default or losing by default. Before anyone jumps into the comments and whines about DeSantis destroying in Florida, I'm not going to contest that DeSantis has done a good job for the Republicans in Florida, but he's a popular incumbent in a state that is rapidly reddening because of in-migration from the rest of the U.S., his victory is not that exciting. In fact, if you look at polling right now, I think it's polling like Trump +7 or something like that in the general against Biden. And last time around, it was polling like Biden +3 or something like that. I mean, Trump ended up winning by 5 points. But even if the polls have been corrected, and Trump is still gaining too, that's still a substantial gain there from an incumbent president. Again, so what gives? Like, why are they bad? Why do they fail? Well, the simple answer is the GOP leadership and the GOP consultants and the GOP candidate selection is awful. That's all true. They don't know what they're doing at the slightest. But why? Well, winning an election campaign and making a good election campaign is actually a lot simpler than most people give it credit. It's more complicated than I'm sure some people give it credit, but it's a lot simpler too. It's not that hard. The problem is the Republicans are basically failing every single precept. Let's take this particular race as an example, Wisconsin. This is a very cogent point here. So why did this fail? Well, actually, let's not pick this one. Let's go back to 2020 Trump. This is a bit easier. No. Actually, we're going to stay here. 2020 House. 2022 House. This is the best one. I swear, I'm honest this time. So why did this one fail? Well, the Republicans and a lot of their supporters have claimed it's a combination of ballot harvesting, lack of turnout, Trump, MAGA, abortion, and neocons. You remember all the things I said earlier? Yeah, that's what they're all claiming. And the actual problem is, it's none of those, well, for the most part, not those things. And pretending it is those things is why the Republicans keep losing. Keep losing races they could win, I should say, because there's races like Ohio's governor race they couldn't really lose because they have an incumbent governor who's relatively popular. That's pretty hard to lose. So the problem the GOP has is they don't identify their core voters. They don't really fundraise enough. The big thing between a lot of the Senate races they lost in 2022, this particular race, the House in 2022, this 2023 Supreme Court, 2020 presidential, is they were outspent. But not only are they outspent, the GOP wastes its money. Like, they're comically bad at wasting their money. It's actually hilarious. The GOP loves attack ads. And now, I'm sure any longtime viewers of this know I think attack ads are stupid. As like an actual political idea, not just a moral level. I think politically they're not very smart. But more than the fact that attack ads themselves are not very smart, you have to look at it on a very basic level here. If the Democrats run attack ads against you and positive ads for themselves, and because they've out-fundraised you, they can spend, let's say, 70% of your total spending on each of these. And you spend 90% on attack ads and 10% on defense. Or positive ads, you could say. Proactive ads. What does this mean? On a very, very, very simple level, that means you are spending 20% more on attacking them, and they're spending 60% more on attacking you. That's a very simple way. So you are losing that exchange, is one way to phrase it. But it's worse than just they are doing more hits to you than you are to them. At the very basic level, even if they were only contesting you 50% on positive to your, like, they're spending 50% of your spending on positive and you were spending 90% of your spending on negative. That's going to do less than 50% of their spending on attack and 10% on your defense. They're both 40% margins, but their 40% margin is less significant for their defense, and it's more significant for their attack. Because when they're attacking, they spend 5 times more money on attack ads than you have on positive ads. And when they're defending, it's just half. It's only more than half, but we're going to call it half for ease. This means that dollar for dollar, or let's rephrase. This means that for the average voter, they're going to see a lot of attack ads for the Democrat candidate, but they're also going to see positive ads for the Democrat candidate. There's a contested image in their mind of what this Democrat candidate is. They know the bad things about them, and they know some good things about them. Why should we vote for this person? Also, why shouldn't we vote for this person? They know this. It's in their head now. All the swayable, gettable voters have a picture. The Republican, on the other hand, doesn't really spend money on positive ads. So the average voter looks at it, they don't know what the Republican candidate wants to do, and they know what the Republican candidate, the bad things about what they're going to do. That's one of the reasons these races seem to be all about abortion, because their Democrat candidate is smashing the Republican with abortion, and the Republican candidate's not doing anything about it. They're not saying anything, they're not changing the topic, they're not running their own ads, they're not doing a campaign. They're just saying they're Democrats extreme, basically, while they're also being painted as extreme. But the Democrats also saying we're going to do these other things. So it's a losing exchange on fundraising and advertising. But it's kind of more than that, too, because there's a very confused messaging from the Republican Party, particularly recently. Particularly post-Dobbs. Every single person who will ever vote in the U.S. is aware the Dobbs decision happened because the GOP picked conservative judges into the court so it would be overturn Roe. No voter who you could ever persuade isn't aware of this. They all know the Republicans got Roe overturned. And all of these voters are also aware all the Republican trifecta states are banning abortion. No single human in the U.S. who you could potentially convince to vote for you is not aware of this. It is so impossible for the Republicans to run away from abortion. It's not even worth attempting. It is just completely pointless. But that's what they're doing. You see these Republican candidates trying to shy away and pretend, oh, I'm pro-choice, or I don't really believe in a 6-week ban or a total ban. I only want a 15-week ban. Meanwhile, every other Republican state is doing a total ban? Bullshit. No one believes you. No one believes you. Not at all. No one believes you. No one will ever believe you. There's nothing the Republicans can do for 30 years to convince the average voter they are pro-choice. Even slightly pro-choice. Zero things they can do. It is completely impossible. Maybe with the one exception, which is almost inconceivable if they got power and they passed a pro-choice law federally or something. But that's so inconceivable, I don't think it's even worth discussing. But that's the only thing they could do to get pro-choice credibility. So running away from Dobbs in the pro-life position is pointless. It's confusing because voters don't really understand where you're coming from. And you're not going to escape it. You're going to be tarred the same way. But in the meantime, you've demoralized your voters because you're running away from a key issue. You look untrustworthy because you are not telling people what you believe. They don't believe you anymore. They don't know what to think of you. And because you are not putting a clear stance, it keeps this issue in the news cycle. Whereas if you put a very clear position, and then pivoted to talking about something else that was very clear and very concrete, it will be fine. You could get away from this. People in elections for hundreds of years have avoided bad topics for them and have done things. But the idea that people can just simultaneously support banning abortion but also pretend they don't is stupid. It's the dumbest thing in the world. There's zero credibility on that. You might as well claim you're be a white guy and claim you're Barack Obama. No one believes you. That's just stupid. That's insulting. It's so dumb. No one believes you. But this confused messaging, because again, all of these things are compounding on each other. If there's one of them, it would be salvageable, but there's so many. There's so many things. It's so dumb. They don't have any proactive ideas. I challenge you in the comments below, name one thing the GOP is running on other than reducing immigration, maybe, gun rights, but that's more of a state level thing, banning abortion, but that's more of a state level thing, and cutting taxes? Shucks. You have no policy positions. You're not saying anything. You're not doing anything. Any voters who already care about immigration are already voting for you. I'm not saying go to the left on immigration. That would be dumb. You're going to lose voters doing that. But you have to do more than that. You can't run a campaign federally, in the case of the House of Representatives or the Senate or the President, on things that are mostly state-controlled issues. Because to keep in mind, too, it'd be one thing if the Republicans are saying we're going to do a national ban on abortion, but they don't have the votes for that, so that's just silly. Even if they had a trifecta, they wouldn't get that passed. At least not yet. Maybe down the line that's possible, but right now, they wouldn't have the votes in a trifecta to get that done. So that's just pointless, and maybe they'll overturn the NFA or something, but I doubt it. But the gist is, nationally, they're not running on anything. They're not saying anything. They're not doing anything. And then they act like they're confused why voters don't vote for them. In fact, one of the only things you see them talking about as a federal policy issue, and this is monumentally stupid. This is such a self-goal. It's unbelievable. Is they want to repeal Social Security. Now, I know who you're going to say in the comments. Social Security's bankrupt. We can't afford all the spending. We're super high deficit. Blah, blah, blah. I know. I know all these things. I know all the arguments. I know every reason why people want to vote repeal Social Security. You know why Social Security is a ridiculously stupid thing for the Republicans to try to campaign on? Who gets Social Security payments? Who gets them? Can you name them? I'll give you a hint. They're old. You know who votes for the Republican Party? Old people. So you're going to overturn fiscal policy that is very popular among old people, that primarily helps old people, for a party's base, which is primarily old people. And then you get surprised when in old states, like Wisconsin, they don't turn out in enough numbers for you to win things like a 2023 Wisconsin Supreme Court race. What? What are you doing? And this is the problem the GOP has. I've named a bunch of specific issues and a bunch of specific failures, but the overwhelming problem that connects all of these together, that connects the lack of fundraising, the lack of campaigning, the confused messaging, the confused issues, the inability to use wedge issues, which I didn't even mention yet, but it's also a really big issue. Wedge issues are really important to winning elections, guys, obviously. But more than all of that, The problem the GOP has, and which is the root cause of all of these problems, every single election they've lost since at least 2016, but I'm going to say 2000 even, is because the party doesn't know who their voter base is. You really have two voter wings of the GOP. You have the suburbanite, fiscally conservative, socially liberal neocon types. And then you have the fiscally liberal, socially conservative, right-wing populist types. Usually these guys are poor, and usually the neocons are rich. Then you have the fiscally conservative, social conservatives who are GOP regardless. They can't lose those unless they decide to not be conservative anymore. But the two swing groups are these two. Now, what's interesting about this is we go over here. Oh, that's not what we wanted to see. Okay, we see this. This is the more important thing to see. This is the 2016 electorate. Let's bring it up, make it bigger. Here is the economic scale. Here is the liberal or the social scale. This corner is your completely socially liberal and completely socially or economically liberal. In this corner is complete economic conservative and social conservative. Now notice there's a clustering here, which is the Democratic Party, and there's a clustering here, which is the GOP. And this clustering right here is the problem. The fact that it is clustered right here is why they're losing. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure, from my perch over here in Canada, what to do about this. But this is a really big issue, and this is a very similar graph everywhere for the record. But in other countries, they have other things that make it easier to work with this. There's really not many socially liberal, fiscally conservative voters. They're very, very rare. In Trump, a lot of these other dots used to be Republican, like 2012 Romney voters, for example. And the GOP's losing them because Trump is a right-wing populist. Trump is like over here somewhere. And this means these people, and to a lesser extent these people, the more fiscally conservative people, don't like Trump. That's why the neocons don't particularly like them. Because the main difference between a neocon and a right-wing populist, and you can use any other variation in different countries, is there's three competing perspectives on conservatism. There are the people who believe we can do both social and economic conservatism simultaneously. There's people who think economic conservatism matters more than anything else, and everything should be sacrificed to ensure that we can do this right now. And there's the opposite. There's people who don't really give a shit about economic liberalism or economic conservatism and will gladly sacrifice that for social wins. These are the three perspectives. You go down to liberals. There's not three perspectives of liberals. This is why the liberals look more united. Because they are more united. They're all liberal. Whereas there's distinctions among right-wingers right now. And I suspect, for the record, this is probably going to pivot this way. And this is going to pivot this way. I could be wrong. And this is not going to be fast. This is going to be a very long, long process. Maybe like 10, 20, 30, 40 years. But watch. I might be dead by then. Hopefully not, but you never know. Why is this a problem for the GOP? Well, they don't know who they want to cater to. These guys, There's not many of them, but they're rich. And what does that mean? That means they can give you lots of donations, and that means they can give you lots of press. You can buy the airwaves. And equally, if you lose them to the Democrats, that gives the Democrats a big money advantage. A small number of these voters swinging usually swings a shitload of money. It's a lot of money being swung. Inversely, these voters are usually really poor. They're usually blue-collar working class people, and specifically in the US, they're heavily either on unemployment or disability in the Rust Belt. And this is one of the reasons why Romney, McCain, Bush, the other Bush, whatever, the people in the 90s, why they didn't do well in the Rust Belt. We go back over here. Bush only won Ohio of the core Rust Belt states, which would be Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, lesser extent Minnesota, lesser extent Iowa, lesser extent Illinois, and lesser extent Indiana. The Rust Belt's almost the entirety of the Midwest, to be honest, but there's the core Rust Belt, and then there's ones that are similar, and you could also argue upstate New York. Basically, the industrial areas. They're roughly in this corner. And today, in 2023, they're poor, for the most part, and very angry, for the most part. Why? Well, they've gotten the bad end of the stick of the last 50 years of history. They've basically taken L every single year for 50 years. Except 2016. That was a W for them, because Trump actually helped this area a little bit. But the core thing here is the GOP doesn't know. They can't decide what they want to do, so they can't target any policy. They can't make any decisions. They're completely lost. And this is why Trump is almost certainly going to win the nomination. Trump knows. Trump has his opinion. Trump is right smack dab right here. He's basically the center of this group. Trump knows who Trump is. His campaign so far for 2024 is actually pretty solid. And it's why he's probably going to win the nomination. He actually knows what he's doing. The rest of the Republicans don't. They don't know who their voters are. That's the fundamental issue. At one side, you have the party really trying to cater to the, I'm going to call it the national conservative voter, and you have the other side really trying to cater to the libertarian voter. You can't win both. In this scale, they are opposites. Losses here are going to come with gains here and vice versa. But the GOP doesn't know what they want to do. So instead of campaigning over here or campaigning over here, they're campaigning like right here-ish. Like pretty much right in the middle. It's a mushy middle. It's ill-defined. It's not very clear what it is. They don't really have any good stances. Because they don't have any good stances because they don't know who they are. They don't know who they believe. They don't know who they're trying to reach. They can't take strong stances. That's why the GOP has no policy ideas. They have no policy ideas, not because Republican congressmen are dumb, not because Republican senators are inept, not because they're the establishment, not because anything else. They have no ideas because they don't know who they're appealing to. Trump took a party that was dying. It was old. It was catering to a small, marginal group of people, roughly this voter range, and he tried to hard shift it to a different party. What we're seeing right now is the result of that. You could argue reasonably that Trump is one of the reasons the GOP is losing right now, but the GOP would have been losing anyways. Hillary should have won 2016. The only reason Trump was president is he ran a competent campaign, and she ran a terrible one. And to be clear, just to touch on Trump for a second, why do I think his campaign is competent? He knew his core voters. He ran positive ads. He had things he was going to do. Build a wall, bring manufacturing back, tariff China, stuff like this. He had a bunch of things he had ideas for. And he had a core voter in mind. He was looking at these guys, and he was going to win them. He had very clear messaging, and he was proactive. And he had wedge issues. The wall, lock her up. 2020 had none of this. 2020 was a terrible campaign. He ran on nothing in 2020. But that's the issue with the GOP. That's why they keep losing. They're not losing because of anything the Democrats are doing. Though I will note the Democrats are running competent campaigns, so it's not helping them. But they keep losing because they don't know who they are. They don't know who they want to be. They don't know why they want to be. And they won't know this because they refuse to address this. The leadership nationally, Senate, House, though House is a lesser extent these days, but the Senate, the Republican National Congress, they're the older style voter like this who want these voters. And then a lot of the House delegation that's relevant and people like Trump are more like this. And these two are destructively interfering, and you get defeats. You can point, like, it's simultaneously Trump and the neocons' fault for why they're losing. But at the same token, the neocons probably can't actually win either way. There's just not enough voters on this side of the political spectrum. They don't exist. You can't campaign where no one is. But with that, I will bid you adieu here. This was an unplanned video. I was just really annoyed and wanted to do a long-form discussion on why the GOP is incompetent. I'm still going to plan on doing my regular video on Sunday, but who knows what that will be. I have some ideas, but I'm not sure if they'll be done in time. We'll see. In other words, if you like the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe, comment below what you think. If you think I'm off base, if you think I'm correct, if you think I missed something, I don't know. All those things. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, follow me on Twitter. Otherwise, I will see you Sunday.